Hi everybody, welcome to today's session, which is diving into the question of whether or not backup is enough for DR. So today we're going to cover a few points. We can't talk about backup and DR without establishing why they're important. We'll talk about a few best practices and then indeed how Island can help. So I'm Mark Beder. I'm the Global Director of Solutions Architecture here at Island, so responsible for our solution architecture practice for helping our customers across the globe in defining those best fit solutions for their needs. So let's dive into our content for today. And I think this is a fairly evident statement. This is not something that I think many people would disagree with. But nowadays, every organization is going to depend on a number of applications to facilitate its working functions, whether that be things like CRM systems, e-commerce systems, ERP, you name it. There's a vast array of application sets out there with delivering different business functions. And each one in their own right is critical to the way a business will function in this day and age. There have been statements made in years gone by the likes of Gartner and other analysts where every company nowadays is a tech company because we're reliant on these systems to deliver what we do. So why is that important and what difference does it make? Well, we're talking about backup and DR, and we're talking about keeping these systems available, protecting your data, and being resilient to disaster events. Now, when people think of DR, there's natural events, natural disasters. That's the common thought process that enters most people's minds when you think about DR. And the extreme analogy of a meteor hitting your data center probably comes up. But these are not necessarily the situations that are most likely to occur. And there's situations which have a low probability and equally situations which will have a much higher probability. So let's have a look at a few which are low probability. It is 2020, and we are living through what is ultimately seen as a low probability event, and that's the pandemic. And that hasn't necessarily brought systems down, but it's changed the way we need to work. But really, the more high probable events that could still be considered a DR event are things like attacks, ransomware, malicious insider, disgruntled employee, and yes, we have seen those situations come up with some of our customers. And then communications breakdown, networking failures, networking outages, those sorts of things. They can bring the business down, not because of those typical DR, natural disaster type scenarios, but ultimately the business still can't function. So in the truest sense, it's still a disaster, and you need to be able to recover from those. So really, let's just have a look at a few statistics which kind of reinforce those high probability scenarios and how likely they are to occur. The statistic speaks for itself, and while 14 seconds to 11 seconds doesn't sound too drastic, that's really a 20% increase in ransomware events, which is a significant increase in the space of 2 years. Equally, compared to where they were, this really gives you a scale of the acceleration and prevalence of ransomware attacks. And then finally, when you look at the recovery time when an organization is hit with an attack, that's a significant window of time. There's other statistics out there which talk about the value of downtime. How much does it cost an organization for every minute, hour, day of downtime when they can't operate? And that's going to vary by sector. Clearly, it's going to vary by turnover, and you can't necessarily use a blanket statement, but there are averages out there that will range from a few thousand per hour in terms of revenue loss into the hundreds of thousands per hour of revenue loss for downtime. So if that's the case and you're down for a week, well, that's a significant hit to the business, and that's just the tangible value. That's the revenue. This doesn't go into reputation and trust in the brand and other elements like that, which are intangible values. So And then a final statistic before we carry on. This is another one which has been fairly widely publicized, but essentially having a trusted backup and DR plan in place is really what's going to enable you to survive these sorts of attacks, these high probability scenarios. And you'll see as we step through these slides why that DR element is critical when we start talking about those other high probability scenarios, like attacks, like communication failures. And when we think about our data as a whole, historically, we've really just had our data being on premises. On premises could be the business site of operation, or it could be a data center, but one that you know where it is and you have the address, and most of the infrastructure was potentially put in there by your organization. That being said, the market is shifting, and we have scenarios with hybrid deployments or cloud-only deployments. But in essence, data is no longer in one location. Add into that the prevalence of SaaS, software as a service applications, and we now start to see that our data is actually spanning multiple locations. So the importance of protecting it hasn't gone away. If anything, it's become more important and more complex to protect what was once data in a single location. But the need to protect it certainly hasn't gone away, just because we're now adopting different technologies. And at Island, one of the things we want to focus on is, you have to try to do all you can to prevent these sorts of situations from happening. You have to protect against them happening if they do occur. And then the element which we see a lot of organizations are not necessarily putting as much thought into is the recovery when they occur. The most prudent approach is to assume that at some point or another, something along these lines, whether it be the high probability or low probability, is going to happen. So then the question becomes is how do you recover from it? And what have you got in place to enable you to recover from it? And to further what was shown on the previous slide, doesn't matter where your data resides, it needs to be protected. So in essence, in short, we feel that backups are simply not enough, because that recovery element, that third piece, is really what's going to determine how effective your solutions are. And this is where backup comes up short. So to put it another way, the recovery from a disaster can sometimes not be given the focus and the importance that it needs. And this is where DR starts to show its true colors in terms of a DR plan and the recovery plan over and above simple backup. Backup will protect your data, and it is critical as to all the points we've just talked about, but it's not addressing the need to recover quickly. That value of downtime and the damage that can do to your organization, that is where the value for disaster recovery, especially disaster recovery as a service, comes into play. These are a few things that we feel are important to consider in terms of that disaster recovery piece. And in addition to these points, we've actually built a bit of a framework around this, framework for success. So at Island, there's two approaches that we take for DR. There's a self-service approach, and the vast majority of our customers leverage this approach. And in that scenario, there's our console, which allows you portal access. You pay for what you consume. There's support available 24/7. It is a self-service model, but we do help you along the way. And we'll show you that console in a moment. We've got a little bit of a demo today in today's session. But there's another option on top of that, which is what we call Island's Autopilot. So Autopilot is a managed DR as a service, where we simply take all those pieces under the self-service model and help you that little bit further. So you get regular reporting, you get regular DR testing within the year, 2 DR tests per year as standard, and all the things that you should be doing when it comes to disaster recovery will help you through. And this, really is the framework, whether you're considering an Island solution or not. When you come to think about DR in general, these are the aspects that really should come to mind as part of your planning. So we're going to do a quick jump to our console, the Ireland Secure Cloud console, and we'll show you some of these things in real time before we come back to the presentation. So let's jump across to that. So if we look behind me, you should see this is the Ireland Secure Cloud console. This environment is ultimately what users will see when they sign up with Ireland, and whether you're consuming DR as a service or infrastructure as a service, that runs from the Ireland Secure Cloud. Now, in this scenario, we're just going to run through a few highlights, a few points. We don't have time today to do a full demonstration. That would typically normally be about 45 minutes to an hour in its own right, because there's a lot to cover. So we're just going to kind of step through a few elements, and then we'll jump back to the presentation. So first and foremost, when it comes to disaster recovery, we have this continuity tab up along the top. Now, we'll come onto it a little bit later in the slides, but I'll just say it now as well. The Ireland Secure Cloud environment is built entirely on a VMware platform. So when you consider your virtualization estate that you might have today, the vast majority of environments out there are running VMware. It's been the market-leading hypervisor for more than a decade. And to that effect, when it comes to replicating your environment and running it in the cloud, that's a very important factor, because there's very little risk when you're having to move those workloads. In other words, when you spin up a VM in a cloud provider, if you're having to have it converted, change the drivers, change the hypervisor, there is a risk to that workload coming up successfully in a DR event. Therefore, if the hypervisor is the same, that risk is reduced. And the last thing you want to do when you're looking at a DR and a solution to deliver DR is actually introduce more risk. It's about risk mitigation, not taking on more risk. Anyway, here we are in our continuity tab. The continuity tab is really where your DR can be managed. Here you'll see all the machines that are protected, the status of that protection, the RPOs that are being achieved. To fail over, we can simply click on our failover wizard up here, and we can choose our failover type. Is this a test or is it a live failover? Let's just say test for now. We can choose what we want to fail over, and there's a concept of a recovery group or a runbook. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into the nuances of those today, but let's just say a recovery group. We choose next. We choose a particular group, and then we choose our point in time. And then DR as a service with Ireland can be offered with two flavors, two underpinning technologies. One is Zerto, one is Veeam. And the interface is slightly different depending on which one you select. But in this scenario, this is a Zerto backend for this DR deployment. And we can choose our checkpoint for where we want to recover to. You can see A, they're very frequent, B, they're very granular. And this allows you to go back to a point in time which even if it's potentially unknown when a disaster occurred, specifically in the form of a ransomware attack type scenario, you can choose different points in times and recover and see which one will actually get the business up and running as to the point in time that you need it to. So let's just choose from November 10th at 9:56 p.m. Click submit, next, and then submit again. And that will invoke a failover in a testing scenario. Now, this entire console is HTML5 based. I could just as easily have kicked this off from a tablet or a mobile phone. The interface is exactly the same. So it's very flexible, and important to note that essentially because it's independent of your production environment, you could run it during the day if you wanted to do some testing. There's no impact. You could equally, if you've lost full access to your production environment, that doesn't matter because you're accessing this environment over the web, and then invoking a DR event, where that's often an area where a lot of solutions can trip up, is that they still need access to the source environment, your production environment, to actually enable failover, whereas this does not. So that's kicked off a task you can see here over on the left. Now, while that's running, because we are short of time, I want to show the output of that. We'd get some virtual machines starting to spin up, but when a test has been run, and we can see the status of this test here running at the bottom, we generate a report off the back of that. So if we look here, here's a failover test, which we ran earlier. We can click on the links over here, and we can download the report regarding the test. So we can see when this report downloads exactly what happened and the timings for it. So we get this PDF. Let's open this up, and everyone will be able to see this. And this is the sort of information that you can run a test in a matter of minutes, prove the capabilities of your DR solution, and then provide this reporting onto your auditors and your business stakeholders that need to see the evidence that you're capable of meeting DR. And one of the things within the report is accurate timings with it to the second of all the tasks involved in achieving that DR result. Equally, within these reports, when they're completed, when these tests are completed, you can capture things like service desk ticket numbers, date and time, other reference data, which allows you to correlate the report information to specific internal business activities. So let's just close that off for now. A few other things while that failover is running, you can see here it's progressing down here quite nicely, is the security. And we'll look at this in the slides as well, but I just want to show you in real time. Security is built into the Island solution. It's baked in. It's just part of what we're all about. And we actually see an increasing use case for customers that do have DR as a service with Island, leveraging the solution to fail over a copy of their production environment and run security scans against that environment. So things like vulnerability scanning, anti-malware, antivirus, IPS, IDS, there are numerous security tools that are built into the platform, which when you think about a DR scenario, the last thing you want to have happen when you do fail over is put yourself at risk, because potentially your DR isn't as secure as your production. We see this as a very critical aspect, and that's why the security is baked in. So when you fail over, you're secure, because you don't want to be worrying about that. You want to be worrying about getting your business back up and running. And that's why we have that there for you. So unfortunately, I'd love to spend more time on the demo. There's more things around role-based access control, performance metrics, VM management, etc. But we're going to have to jump back to the slides because we're short on time today. We've got some more information that at the end of the slides that people can, of ways you can reach out and get in touch with us to have a further conversation, schedule your own demo, and we can go through these things in more detail. But really what we looked at is we started running a failover, a few clicks, as you could see, you choose a point in time and off you go. That could have been live or test. We didn't take a look at the particular page around the billing, but Island billing is as simple as can be, in a sense that we try and minimize the number of SKUs that are billed against. Things aren't metered and metric like a lot of other cloud providers, which makes it as easy as possible to understand your billing and in turn also predict your costs. Leveraging VMware features such as NSX networking allow for full feature capability. So customers can connect into Island in a number of ways. So in terms of extending the environment into the DR solution, whether that be VPN, point-to-point, MPLS, and various other forms of connectivity, including client-based SSL connections. That's all there. We did take a look very briefly at the security and compliance page, but there's clearly a lot of detail behind that. That was really the dashboard view. And the main thing to the point around VMware as the base is you have the management capabilities of every machine that you fail over, just as you would on premises. So you can manage your VMs, you can configure the CPU, memory, disk, look at performance metrics, open the VM console, which is another really important factor where a lot of cloud providers don't enable you to do. And it's really quite intuitive in that respect. So your DR platform is a very simple extension of your production platform from a feature capability, from a performance capability, and from a manageability perspective. So really, when we start talking about DR as a service, some of the key points to highlight are things like the OpEx model. You're not having to buy a whole bunch of infrastructure to place in a secondary site to achieve DR. You can consume it on demand. So for the most part, what you're consuming the vast majority of the time is storage in another facility, and that's all you end up paying for. Your actual compute, your CPU and RAM, that's when you do a failover test or indeed failover. So it's a much more cost-effective model. The geographic redundancy piece is really quite a critical one. We have a map and a couple slides in terms of our global regions, but the point being is you aren't having to source another location in a 25-mile range from your production site or a 50-mile range from your production site. You can choose from one of the global regions that we offer. We just did a failover test, but you can schedule that and you can run that completely non-disruptive to your production environment because it's an entirely independent environment. We had a look at the reporting that came out of it, and that automated reporting is really powerful in meeting compliance needs that you might have in terms of auditing and so on. And to the point of compliance, as mentioned, we take this very seriously at Island. We have over 20 certifications and attestations under our belt with an in-house compliance team that's available to support our customers through that compliance journey, whether our end customers undergoing an audit or just has general questions. But we take this very, very seriously, and there's a few certification badges on that page which are ultimately part of a relatively elite group. The one in particular, the CSA Star, where Ireland holds a gold standard award in that certification program. So we've spoken today really about the protection and the recovery element of our data. So the backup and the DR piece. But like I mentioned, our DR as a service actually runs on the Island Secure Cloud, and that's where our infrastructure as a service would potentially run, well, does run. But if you consume that, know that from a DR perspective, you're actually consuming the same enterprise-grade compute platform that you would be consuming if you took the infrastructure as a service solution. So there's no cutting corners, there's no performance hit you might have to take in the case of DR. It's a performant production ready platform, but delivering DR services. And really, let's kind of sum up the main reason why we're even talking about DR in the first place. When it comes to disaster recovery, it's really about reducing your risk of your production site going down, risk of access potentially to your production site if your infrastructure resides within your primary office, and the pandemic has really highlighted that for a lot of organizations. So it's reducing those risks. To the commercial models behind things, we talk about only paying for what you use. It's saving money, and there's no two way about it. It is a more cost-effective approach to disaster recovery than DIY or even other cloud solutions. And then, a third element is it's helping you drive revenue. And you might question, well, how does a DR solution help me drive revenue? By removing the overhead and the administration time, the people time from having to manage a DR solution, those resources, those individuals, and potentially that capital that you're now saving can be redistributed onto other revenue generating activities and business value driving activities. So that's really what we mean by that. And it's been proven many times over, and we have a number of case studies where this is the case. But freeing up that resource, whether it be people or money, can really make a difference to an organization and its capabilities and what it can do. So you might be wondering, well, this sounds great. Well, how do you even get started? How do you know what's needed? At Island, we've built a tool called Catalyst. And Catalyst can look at an environment, understand what's running with that environment. It's a small executable that's downloaded from that link, And ultimately, that's going to enable you to get a starting point for checking things like compatibility, connectivity into our global regions, um, and anything that might potentially be a bottleneck for consuming this DR as a service. But equally, it's going to help the team on the island side calculate the necessary requirements. So from like a storage perspective, networking, all building up to ensuring that the DR is as successful as can be, and as successful as we have been with delivering DR to our customers. So really, who are Island? Where are we based? What are we about? As an organization, we've been around for over 25 years. From a cloud and DR perspective, it's actually 12 going on 13 years now. We do offer 100% availability, and as you can see from the dots on the map, we operate across the globe, and in turn have customers consuming these services across the globe. And you don't have to just take our word for it. You can just look at the external market and the industry. This particular slide shows our recognition from Gartner as being a leader in the disaster recovery as a service space, and that was consistently from 2016 to 2019. Unfortunately, in 2020, they didn't do an MQ for DR as a service, but we're confident that if they did, we would have remained in that leader quadrant. And it's not just Gartner when it comes to our credentials. When Forrester ran an equivalent for the Forrester Wave, we're a leader acknowledged by Forrester. And then from the underpinning technologies that we leverage, we've won numerous awards from our partners as well in that space. So, it's a lot to take in a very short space of time, and thank you everyone for listening, and equally thank you to Computer World for having us along. If you'd like to see more, please head to that link, island.com/EMEA 2020 Computer World Defined Tomorrow. There's white papers available for download. You can sign up for free trials, or indeed you might just want to see more and have that longer sort of 45 minutes to an hour long demo where we can step through the platform in a lot more detail, show you more of its capabilities, and answer more specific questions. So thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of the event, and take care.